The first two modules in this unit focus on the personal and situational factors that influence dishonest behavior and cheating. Perhaps the most common form of cheating on the internet is stealing, illegally obtaining and sharing digital materials such as ebooks, music, and movies. This module looks at a different behavior, breaking into computer systems. That is, we'll look at the motivation behind hacking. Hackers have been in the news a lot lately and have been the focus of much debate in society. Depending on who is interviewed, they are either hero or villain. Take WikiLeaks, for example. Julian Assange made WikiLeaks well known worldwide when he began to publish U.S. military and diplomatic documents. Assange was a hacker as a teenager and cultivates the image of a watchdog and guardian against tyranny. He's been labeled a terrorist by some in the United States and a hero or protector of freedom by others. He's been compared, for example, to Daniel Ellsberg, who's famous for releasing the Pentagon Papers back in the Vietnam War era. Another example is Anonymous, the loosely organized international network of activists and hacktivists. This group has become has become well known for a series of publicity stunts and has distributed denial of service attacks on government, religions, and corporate websites across the world. Excuse me. Broadly speaking, Anonymous opposes internet censorship and control, and the majority of their actions target governments, organizations, and corporations that they accuse of censorship. Again, they are seen as terrorists by some and protectors of individual freedoms by others. Then there's a well-publicized case of Aaron Swartz, internet activist who was arrested by MIT police on breaking and entering charges after systematically downloading academic journals from the MIT servers. Federal prosecutors charged him with, among other things, violations of Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. He faced the possibility of $1 million in fines and 35 years in prison. This was seen as pretty excessive by many observers. While he was awaiting trial, and after an offer of a plea bargain was denied, he hanged himself. After his death, many were outraged at the federal prosecutors in the case over their tactics, and he was hailed by many as an internet hero. However, asked the question if he committed comparable crimes that were not over the internet, such as if he broke into the MIT library and stole print copies of journal articles. Would the reaction from the public have been the same, and would the prosecution have been the same? You can sort of see the murky area of hacking in his case. Okay, so hacking is a vague term. Most common definitions involve the notion of unauthorized access to computer networks. So hacking is seen as deviance because it's unauthorized, but the term carries both positive and negative connotations. In terms of negative deviance, hackers are seen as criminals, threats to national security, intellectual property thieves. By the way, this negative deviance term has been used to label this type of hackers as crackers. Okay, so crackers are used for the negative deviance angle of hacking, as opposed to hackers, which carries more of a positive term of positive deviance. At least that's sort of historically been the case. So in terms of positive deviance, many hackers are seen as pioneers of public access. Others claim to just be testing the security systems of organizations, and so they're actually performing an important service. They argue they're finding the vulnerabilities and hence ultimately they're increasing security. Even Bruce Schneier, the security expert who's I've quoted in a couple lectures so far, and you'll read some of his work, he seems to sort of come down on this positive deviance side. His quote is that we're sitting in a world where often hackers are the only ones holding up their hands and saying, look, this isn't any good. You're being sold a bill of goods. This isn't really security. That's a quote from one of his columns. So there's definitely this view of hackers as serving a public good, if you will. Now, I should say that not everybody obviously shares that view. Um, the chief of the Justice Department unit on computer crime, for example, when asked about this positive view, said, and I quote, "I hear that argument a lot. I have to say that I think it's a very silly one. It seems to me that thanking hackers who violate privacy of networks or network users for pointing out to us our vulnerabilities is a little bit like sending thank you notes to burglars for pointing out the infirmity of our physical alarms. That's silly." Again, that was a quote from the chief of Justice Department. Okay, so again, just sort of mixed views on the on hacking. So again, just to summarize, if you think about negative deviance as breaking things, crackers break things. They write tools that break into systems and enter and do harm by stealing or disrupting. On the positive deviant side, hackers build things. They want to use their skills and knowledge for good purposes. They inform about security gaps and vulnerabilities in e-commerce. Example here is the Open Source Society. There actually was a study done by Leeson and Coyne in 2005 looking at the self-expressed, and I emphasize self-expressed motives of hackers. 36% said they hack to advance network software and computer capabilities. 34% claim they hack to solve puzzles or challenges. This is something we'll return to a little bit later in the lecture. And 5% said they hack to make society a better place. Okay, so we tend to think a little bit about hackers as being motivated by greed. These quotes seem to suggest that perhaps some hackers are motivated by fame as well. I should also make a distinction between state-sponsored hacking or attacks by government or government-sponsored individuals on corporations or private websites, and individual hacking. There's a famous case back in February of 2013 in which the New York Times reported how China was using state-sponsored hacking to hack into the New York Times and steal its information. They actually caught wind of it, so they followed it for several weeks and published an article on it. For the rest of this lecture, I will focus on the motivation of the individual hacker as opposed to the state-sponsored hacking. Okay, so one thing is for sure, hackers, both good and bad, so hackers and crackers, if you will, have a distinct self-identity. It's sort of an imagined identity that binds them together. Hackers consider themselves a part of a worldwide computer subculture. It's a diverse subculture that's tied together by these characteristics here. The hackers have highly specialized skills. They have a set of justifications for their actions. By the way, you should think, or hopefully you made the connection back to Dan Ariely's work for malleable categorization of dishonest behavior. Anyway, they have justification for their actions. There's information sharing networks. Hacker forums are all over the place. You can just go on and find them. And what these forums do is they present problems, offer solution, provide advice, and seek advice. Hackers have their own specific technical language, and there's a status hierarchy and norms within the hacker subculture. But while they are similar in the set of skills they have, they also there are differences based on their interest and their specific skills and behavior. There's been plenty of research done focusing on the personality characteristics of hackers. Researchers tend to view these individuals as unique. It's almost like the view of the hacker as someone who is born, not made. I'm not sure I would go that far, but they seem to, the researchers seem to view hackers as having very special or specific personality characteristics. This is just a list of different traits that researchers have ascribed to hackers in different articles that I was able to draw. They're highly curious, they're individualistic, highly intelligent, anti-conformist. They have the ability to absorb and retain, that should be retained, sorry, large amounts of detail and knowledge. The examples is that they can pour through thick reference materials and manuals and remember that material. They tend to have an internal locus of control, they're achievement oriented, and so it makes them drawn to challenges. They're impatient and self-absorbed. Many different personality characteristics have been ascribed to them. In addition to personality characteristics, it is important, and I would argue more important, to look at the different motives that direct hackers' energy and actions. There are 6 main motives that have been identified in hackers. Greed, sort of monetary outcomes, relate that to the drive to acquire. This one, if you talk to experts in the field, they document that the major motivation from their perspective seems to be greed, although in the research press and the popular press it seems to be overlooked. But clearly a lot of people hack into organizations to steal money, in essence, or to steal things that will get them money. The other motives we mentioned, challenge, you can relate that to the drive to learn, the drive to acquire. Notoriety, status, recognition, also related to the drive to acquire, drive to bond. Curiosity, we can relate that to the drive to learn. And then there's more and more, ideologically driven hackers, either political ideology or religious ideology. And finally, you do see some evidence of vengeance being a powerful motive for hacking, to get back at organizations or people that have done you wrong. Excuse me. In terms of looking at theoretical attempts to explain hacking, one you've already seen. This is the control theory of crime. We looked at this in the article by Moon and colleagues, looking at the Korean youths who were stealing, or downloading, pirating media online. If you remember back to that article in the Control Theory of Crime by Gottfredson and Hirsch, crime is a byproduct of people with low self-control placed in or selecting into environments that present illegal opportunities. Hackers spend a lot of time on the computer and hence have plenty of opportunity. So one applying this theory would say that those individuals with low self-control are more likely to engage in illegal activity. To hackers who have these specialized skills, the offenses are easy to commit and the opportunities are plentiful. So over time, the argument would be that those with low self-control are likely to be drawn into criminal behavior. You saw the results read the results from the Moon et al. Article that did find greater illegal downloads among Korean teens who spent longer hours on the computer, i.e. opportunity, and who had lower levels of self-control. A major weakness of this theory, however, is that it places too much emphasis on just one variable. Human behavior is complex and multiply determined, and so while low self-control may be one aspect of committing internet crimes, my feeling is that it's and I think it's a shared feeling by researchers in the area, that much too much emphasis is placed on this one variable. And also it may apply most to the negative deviance view of hacking. This control theory of crime probably does not do as good a job of explaining the positive deviance that we reviewed earlier. Excuse me. A second theoretical attempt to explain hacking relates to theories of intrinsic motivation and curiosity. This probably does a better job of explaining some of the positive deviance, positively deviant behavior, that is. According to intrinsic motivation theories, internal rewards, specifically feelings of self-determination, autonomy, and challenge, drive behavior. This would fall right out of the drive to learn motives that we talked about in the opening lecture of class. And as an example of how intrinsic motivation may explain hacking behavior, uh, some of you may be familiar with the theory of psychological flow. Um, Psychological flow refers to sort of an intense state of motivation where people are focused on the activity and not the external consequences of it. To use a sports analogy, it's like being in the zone. Basketball players are often referred to as being in the zone when they're on a hot streak on the court. Um, Psychologists have spent quite a bit of time looking at this phenomenon of flow. And they find that flow is most likely to occur when task demands, the demands of the task or activity, match a person's skill level. So if you're highly skilled, you would be in a state of flow when the demands of the tasks are quite high. And you think about breaking into computer systems, that's a very demanding task. And these hackers have high skills, and so working on a problem of how to enter an organization's computer system can capture people into this flow corridor. Um, if your skills exceed task demands up here, you're basically bored. And if your task demands exceed skill, then it's a state of anxiety. But this is where flow is experienced, and much of hacking, the tasks and activities of hacking, probably fall into this flow corridor, so there might be intense intrinsic motivation to keep going. Although flow, I would argue, surely captures part of the instant intrinsic motivation of hackers. Again, it may not be a complete theory or comprehensive theory to explain hacking. Theory that I would argue does a little bit better job is what's called social learning theory. Social learning theory, and again, in a second, I'm going to relate this to expectancy value theory that we discussed earlier. According to social learning theory, which proposed by Albert Bandura, for those who have had some psychology may recognize his name, social learning theory states that people motivate themselves anticipatorily, that again they sort of imagine what are the consequences of their actions, and if they perceive positive consequences occurring, they're going to be more likely to engage in the behavior than if they perceive negative consequences. Social learning theory also argues that people can learn by observing others' actions and the consequences of their behavior. This is observational learning. Again, if you're familiar with Bandura, his famous study back in the 1960s was with observational learning in kids when they learned how to model violent behavior by peers or adults. Social learning theory also states that people are capable of imagining themselves in similar situations and incurring similar consequences to others. So again, if you see fame coming to individuals for hacking, quite easy for you as a skilled computer specialist to imagine yourself in a similar situation and incurring similar consequences. Another aspect of social learning theory is that reinforcement comes from both internal and external sources. Okay, so there's internal feelings of pride and self-esteem, and there's external sources of motivation as well, such as peer recognition and money. These things can also be tangible. Money, tangible being something you can touch, and social, sort of intangible, such as peer status. You boil social learning theory down to two determinants of motivation to act: self-efficacy and self-incentives. When self-efficacy is high and self-incentives are high, individuals are likely to be motivated to perform the activity. Self-efficacy may be a new term to many of you, so let me define it real quickly, and hopefully you'll start seeing a connection to another concept we've discussed, that being expectancy. Um, Perceived, a little bit broader term. Perceived self-efficacy refers to beliefs in one's capabilities to organize and execute the courses of action required to produce given attainments. That's the exact quote from Albert Bandura. It's basically your belief that you're able to pull together, the resources and organize things to produce a desired result. So, for example, your perceived self-efficacy for doing a paper would be beliefs about your capabilities at the moment to understand material, to find material, to pull together and to write a coherent paper. So that would be your self-efficacy for writing the paper. This belief that you can do it, that you can produce a desired result. I can write the paper to get an A or B plus or whatever goal you may have. That belief provides an incentive to act. We like to do things we think we can perform successfully. It's important to realize that self-efficacy beliefs are task and situation specific. We feel highly efficacious in one setting, for example, school or sports, but not the other. Also, efficacy varies across time for similar tasks. You may feel efficacious for one task in a class, but not another, for one test in a class, but not another test because of differences in preparation. You might have more time to prepare for test 1 than for test 2, so the efficacy may be higher. So the point here is that self-efficacy is situation and state dependent. Okay, so self-efficacy was one critical component to the motivation to act, and the other is self-incentives. According to social learning theory, people evaluate themselves against internal standards. We set a goal for ourselves in terms of our behavior, our performance. And when we attain that goal, or we perceive ourselves as being our behavior being congruent with that goal, we hold positive views of ourselves. We're self-satisfied. So it's sort of, if you think about it, attaining our internal goals is a meta goal of ourselves. We set goals for ourselves, whether it's in all aspects of life, whether it's in terms of how we treat friends, how honest we are. If you go back to Dan Ariely's work, what we want in terms of goals for classroom performance, etc. Bandura argues that when we set goals, especially in the achievement area, there's a common tendency among most people to produce discrepancies between where we're at now and where we want to be, or where we intend to be. So we typically set standards or goals for behavior that are higher than our current performance. So if currently you're a 3.0 student, you probably are setting a goal for yourself of a 3.2 or 3.5. These self-incentives then become the incentives to act. The excuse me. Two aspects of self-incentives, and again, tying back in the notion of that we motivate ourselves anticipatorily, it's the Bandura would argue that it's the anticipated self-satisfaction that comes from reaching our goals that spurs us forward, as well as the anticipated self-dissatisfaction from failing to reach them. Okay, so we have two sort of self-incentives to act: how good we're going to feel when we reach our goals, as well as this appreciation for how unhappy or self-dissatisfied we would be from failing to reach our goals. So it's in a way a carrot and a stick operating at the same time. Visually, this is how Bandura views motivated behavior or action. He argues that you start with a sort of status quo, where you're at now, and you set a goal. And this is what's called the discrepancy production process. We look at what we're current level of performance, and we set a goal for future performance. So, for example, hackers may say to themselves, "Well, no one's broken into this system. I want to be the first to break in." Okay, so again, setting and this you can see as discrepancy production, because no one's done it. I want to be the first one to do it. So the challenging goal is set. In this case, it's to break into a computer network. Go back to what Bandura said. When would people be motivated to do this? When self-efficacy is high and when self-incentives are high. You know, again, go back to the personality characteristics and the skills that computer hackers have. They tend to be highly efficacious surrounding computer tasks and hacking tasks. So if to the extent that they have a high self-efficacy, I can do this, okay, and there's high anticipated satisfaction for being the first to break into this network, it's going to lead to goal direction action, which in essence you can see as trying to reduce that discrepancy. So according to Bandura, we motivate ourselves first by producing a discrepancy, and then self-efficacy and self-incentives act or cause us to act to try to reduce that discrepancy. In this case, reducing the discrepancy would be solving the problem of how to break in. Once we hit our goal attainment, then we experience those tangible, intangible, internal and external outcomes that are rewarding. Okay, so Bandura, by the way, doesn't deny the effect of external outcomes. He just argues that during our performance, it's the while acting, it's the self-incentives that are the main fuel for behavior, main source of motivation combined with self-efficacy. Okay, maybe saying, why am I introducing another theory here when I've already stressed E times V theory in the beginning of the class? Well, I think social learning theory can be incorporated into E times V theory and help us better appreciate the internal drive for the internal sources of motivation. So what I've done here is just taken that opening slide I gave you, or in one of the opening lectures when we talked about E times V theory, and I basically use social learning theory concepts here and looking at hacking from E times V and social learning theory perspective. So we basically have a very difficult task or a situation of high discrepancy production. Individuals are trying to hack into a complex computer system. Individuals who have high self-efficacy are likely to have what we VIE theory would call high expectancy. Again, let's put expectancy in probabilistic terms, ranging from 0 to 1. An expectancy of 0.75 is a fairly high belief that one can do the activity, so it's a high self-efficacy. So high expectancy would relate to high self-efficacy, which would lead to maintain persistence or effort. Eventually, that effort and persistence, when combined with skills, will lead to hacking success. The success, breaking into the computer system, is going to be linked to several different outcomes. Okay, there's going to be feelings of pride, perhaps feelings of fame and notoriety, and also a sense of accomplishment. If you remember back in E times V, we talked about these perceptions here being instrumentality. What's the probability that if the performance is attained, that these things will be experienced? Well, I've just set them at 1 for now. It's a sure thing. If the hacker hacks into the system, he or she, I tend to say he because most hackers are male, they will feel pride, will certainly feel, probably will gain fame and notoriety, and also will experience a sense of accomplishment. Again, over here we're just putting constructs onto a scale. We talk about the value or valence attached to the outcomes. We can think of -5 being something you really dislike, to +5 being something you highly like. In my example here, the hacker highly values pride, notoriety, and accomplishment. So there'd be a high motivation to act in this case. If you wanted to sort of summarize the motivational state of the hacker in this example, I'm pretty certain I can hack into the computers, and if I do, I anticipate feeling very satisfied. You can easily switch these outcomes, by the way, and let's see, go back here. This one may be the previous one. For some reason I can't go back. Okay, the previous example They had outcomes focused on internal rewards. Maybe it's more the positive deviance. Examples of hacking. You can easily switch the outcomes to accommodate, you know, more negative deviance, if you will, by replacing pride, excuse me, and accomplishment with financial gain or revenge, for example. And the same thing could occur, that the hacker would be pretty sure that they can do the task and gain the outcomes they're looking for. In this case, you know, greed motivation or revenge motivation. Okay, so this, I would argue, sort of this combined E times V and social learning theory view of hacking is a much more comprehensive approach, and is able to capture both the outcomes related to positive deviance and negative deviance of hacking. Okay, so that's just a overview of motivation to hack. It sort of accompanies the readings that you have, and I hope it clarifies things for you, and we'll be online to discuss. Thank you.